How's it going, Gumi Gang, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you guys are doing awesome. In today's video, we're going to be revisiting an old shotgun that definitely made a name for itself. Back in Modern Warfare 2's version of Warzone, this thing came out in about Season 2, and it took the world by storm and basically broke the close range meta for a little bit. It was incredibly strong with a 2-shot potential. It was insane, and of course, I'm talking about the KV Broadside. Now, eventually, this thing got nerfed multiple times to what it is current day, and so we're going to revisit it, and I'm going to talk about my experience with it, if it's actually worth using, and also compare it to its nearest competitor, which is the Haymaker shotgun. So let's just go ahead and get right into it, starting off with some basic stats on sim.gg. So here we are on sim, and I went ahead and put on the Dashbolt 60 attachment so we get our better fire rate. Now if we take a look at the time to kill values, out to about that 3.3 meter mark or so, we have a 476 millisecond time to kill. This is very, very good, one of the best in the game, of course, and it's very, very strong. Now it drops off pretty steep at about the 4 meter mark to about 952, which is actually pretty steep. It's almost a second. And then again, it drops off out at about that 8 meter mark to the 1190 millisecond time to kill you see here, which is just not very good. Taking over a second that far is pretty rough, to say the least. Now what I did is I went and added the Haymaker to the equation, and as you can see up close and personal, the KV Broadside and the Haymaker basically kill about the same. I mean, the Haymaker technically kills a little bit slower, but it's 4 milliseconds. Come on, that's really not a big difference. But as you can see, that range for the KV Broadside extends out a little bit further for that 476 than the Haymaker. But as you notice, when the Haymaker basically drops off to its next range, it's only at 720 compared to the KV Broadside, which drops off to 952. And then again, as you can see here, the KV Broadside still 952, Haymaker 960, but then the Haymaker just continues at 960 while the KV Broadside is at 1190, and it's basically as far as you can shoot with this thing. So as you can see, the Haymaker is basically kind of the better of the bunch here, just because it's not as steep of a drop off. Even though it has a little bit less range up close, it's going to have a much more consistent drop off, and it doesn't drop off nearly as hard. So with the base ammo, you can kind of see that the Haymaker, I think, has a little bit more of the advantage. Again, it doesn't have as great of a sort of max damage range or where that 3-shot potential is, but it does beat the KV Broadside in the time to kill department in pretty much every other range, and it doesn't drop off nearly as steep. So really, the Haymaker is kind of the way to go between these two, at least on paper. Now, of course, we do have access to Dragon's Breath, and that does change things a little bit. Now, on sim, I can't really show you because Dragon's Breath doesn't really take into account the burn that stacks when you shoot multiple times, which sim does not show you, so I'll just show you guys what I have on my spreadsheets instead. So here's the Haymaker with Dragon's Breath. As you can see, it basically extends your 3-shot kill out to about that 4.1 meter mark, and it also actually drops off a little bit harder after that 4.1 meters. So before it would drop off to about 720, here it immediately drops off to 960, and then it drops off even harder with a 1440 millisecond time to kill, which is absolutely terrible. Do not use this thing that far, and it's at about 8.9 meters, so that's really where this thing starts to fall apart. But the nice thing about Dragon's Breath with the Haymaker is that you get a much better 3-shot kill range, and you also kind of blind people. I think a lot of people really like Dragon's Breath because of that, or maybe hate it because of that, whichever one, pick your poison. But yeah, this thing hits a little bit harder up close, has a little bit of a better 3-shot range, but then it drops off a lot harder. So there is a trade-off. Overall, the base Haymaker is probably a lot more consistent, but you can blind people with Dragon's Breath, which I know, again, is one of the allures about it, and also it's got a better 3-shot. Now, with the KV Broadside and Dragon's Breath, I just really don't recommend it. It really doesn't change anything for the better for the gun. Basically, up close, you lose that 3-shot potential. It turns into a 4-shot, so instead of 476, it's immediately 714, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't really help anything else about the gun. It's just terrible. I really do not recommend Dragon's Breath on the KV. If you're going to use it, make sure to use it with the base ammo. One important thing I do want to talk about, though, is the sprint to fire speed, and the difference between the two for the shotguns, the Haymaker and the KV Broadside, is that the KV Broadside has an overall much quicker sprint to fire speed than the Haymaker. The base guns for the Haymaker has about a 262 millisecond sprint to fire speed, which is really, really rough, and that only gets worse with attachments unless you put on like the stockless grip and a laser. And then you have the KV Broadside sitting at 189 with the base gun, which again isn't amazing, but that's much better than 262. And one of the things that suffers with the Haymaker, and that a lot of sledgehammer Sledgehammer Games sort of shotguns tend to suffer from is that big barrels will basically hurt your sprint to fire speed, and a lot of magazine attachments do as well. So this thing will definitely get a kind of rough sprint to fire speed compared to the KV, which on the build that I'll show you guys has about a 120 millisecond sprint to fire speed or so, which is very, very good compared to the Haymaker, which is like above 200, which is just really rough to work with. It's going to feel very slow, and for that, I think the KV Broadside definitely has an advantage because, again, the sprint to fire speed feels much snappier. Since this is a KV Broadside focused video, I do want to show you guys the build I've been rocking. This is probably my favorite build so far because it's got great mobility, great sprint to fire speed, and also has a little bit better range. We're rocking the range 12 barrel, which is one of the barrels that gives us a little bit more range, about 26%, but it's also not going to hurt our aim down sight speed and sprint to fire speed and all that. It doesn't really slow us down too much. The Kimura RAL 33 laser is amazing because it gives us better tac stance spread, but also a much better sprint to fire speed and aim down sight speed as well. And of course, the other ones are the 12 shell, VOK stockless, and dash bolt. You can rock the 25 round drum if you want. It's really not going to hurt you. I would say you can use it if you want, if you're in trios and quads. I just prefer having a little bit better mobility, but it's not that much to sacrifice. So I'd say go for the 25 round drum mag if you really want to. Now, when it comes down to which one is better and which one you should actually use, there's definitely an objective and subjective part of this that I want to explain. So objectively, the Haymaker is probably the way to go. It has a much better drop off. It doesn't drop off nearly as hard, has better time to kill values generally overall, except for maybe, I don't know, that 4 milliseconds up close, which is just negligible, not really worth mentioning. Even though it does have a worse sprint to fire speed, if you're kind of walking around and picking your battles right, it won't really screw you up too bad, but it is noticeable, so just keep that in mind. But overall, the Haymaker is a great shotgun. With Dragon's Breath, you do get a better 3-shot kill potential. It just has a steeper drop off, so it's really up to you which one you should be using. I would say the base M was more consistent overall, but if you want to be a little bit more of a daredevil and get super, super close, then I would say that Dragon's Breath is probably the way to go as well. Now, the subjective part of this is that I actually prefer the KV Broadside, and that is because I don't know why, but when I was using it, it was just more of a smoother experience. I noticed I was hitting my shots better. It was very good in terms of its mobility. It felt like it was a lot more consistent, and for whatever reason, I was winning a lot of my one-on-one engagements. Like, there really wasn't many times where I was just straight up losing gunfights with this gun. Whereas the Haymaker, I felt like it was just kind of a toss-up sometimes, and I think a big part of it is that with Sledgehammer Games and the way they design shotguns, sometimes they have a little bit sort of this crazy recoil, like visually, and I think it's a little bit noticeable on the Haymaker. But with the KV Broadside, it's not nearly as bad, and overall, it just felt so smooth to me, and I'm really impressed with the KV. Like, I'm actually very impressed with how it felt. Despite the time to kills on paper being kind of weak, it's actually very, very good, and I definitely recommend you guys checking it out. Out of both of them, of course, the Haymaker is probably the better option, but please do not sleep on the KV Broadside, especially with the base ammo. It's actually very, very good. So that is just about going to do it for this video, guys. So as always, down below in the comments, I want to know your thoughts on all of this. What do you think about the KV Broadside? Do you think it's been pretty much nerfed into oblivion? Do you prefer the Haymaker with Dragon's Breath or the base ammo? And with all that being said, guys, I will see you in the next video.